All right, guys, this better be the last video. I'm sure you're feeling the same that I am. Finishing up with number 8, we were just going ahead to find, we already found the critical values for the second derivative, and we're just testing into the second derivative, -2, 0, and 2. So when I plug in -2, I get a negative in the first, and then if I plug in a -2 here, I'm also going to get a negative, so negative times a negative is a positive. If I plug in f double prime of 0 in here, I'm going to get a positive and then a negative, so I'm going to get a negative. If I plug in, sorry guys, my dog wants to join this video. I'll hold this. Just pause this. All right, sorry about that. So moving on, we went ahead and tested this in, and we got that this was a positive, this was a negative, and when we do the second derivative of 2, you're going to get that it's a positive and a positive. So now our signs are there. Going back to the question, they're asking you for when f is concave down. Well, if they want f concave down, we're looking for the second derivative to be negative, so the interval is just from -1. The answer here would be from -1 to 1. And remember, the second derivative is not inclusive. Okay, number 9. Number 9 asks you to determine the value of x for which the graph of the function g is concave down upwards. So g being concave upward means that I need g double prime to be greater than 0. All right, so this is a very, very straightforward. G prime of x is equal to, this gives me 30 x to the 4th minus 30 x squared. Then I need to move on to the second derivative for concavity, and that's going to give me 120 x to the 3rd minus 60 x to the 1st. I'm going to set it equal to 0, so I'm going to take out a 60x, and I'm going to be left with 2x squared minus 1 equals 0. And so when I go ahead and factor, I'm going to get 60x equals 0, so x is equal to 0. Here, 2x squared minus 1 equals 0. So I'm going to get that x squared is equal to 1/2 square root. X is equal to plus or minus 1 over the square root of 2, which is the same thing as square root of 2 over 2 if you rationalize it. Whichever one is fine. So on my number line, we're just going to get that 0, and then second square root of 2 divided by 2 is roughly about 0.7, just so you have an idea of where positive 1 over rad 2 is roughly around 0.7, and -1 rad 2 is -0.7. So now when you go to test, I'm going to test the appropriate values into 60x, 2x squared minus 1, and I'm going to test my second derivative, I'll call it g double prime of, I'll put -2 here, well that'll be a negative, and then this -2 squared is going to be a positive times this minus 1, well that's always going to be positive then, so that's going to be a negative in this section. If I test the -1/2, 60 times -1/2 is going to be a negative, and then -1/2 squared, well let's think about that. -1/2 squared is going to be positive 1/4. Okay, 1/4 times 2 is a positive 1/2. Positive 1/2 minus 1 is another negative. So that's positive. So this section's positive. So now if I go ahead with positive 0.5, you're going to test then, that's going to be a positive for this section right here. And then a positive 1/2 squared, well that's going to be again a negative, because positive 1/2 squared is 1/4 times 2 is a 1/2. 1/2 minus 1 is a negative, but now I have a positive times a negative, which is a negative. And last but not least, when we go ahead and test, I'll say 1. Here, we're going to go get a positive here and then another positive, so that makes this section positive. So concave upward, your interval, is going to be written as negative rad 2 over 2, or you could have written negative 1 over rad 2. These are both the same, to 0. And we also would have this as positive rad 2 over 2 to infinity. That was a very crazy infinity sign. Sorry about that. Rad 2 to infinity. Okay? So either one, whether you want to rationalize it or not, this means exactly the same. All right, last problem. All right, the last problem is asking you, which this often comes up on the AP, for what values of x is the graph of f of x decreasing and concave down. That and means that both conditions must be true. So if both conditions must be true, you need to have both number lines to refer to. So when I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, decreasing, I need my first derivative to be less than 0. Concave down means I need my second derivative to be less than 0. So let's go ahead and find when this happens. The first derivative, this becomes 12x minus 3x squared. I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to 0. I'm going to GCF a 3x out. I'm going to be left with 4 minus x equals 0. And my two critical values are going to be 0 and 4 minus x equals 0 is just x equals 4. So on my first derivative number line, I get 0. That's just a single derivative. I get 0 and 4. I test into 3x, 4 minus x, and I get that when I test a negative 1, that's going to be a negative, and that's going to be a positive, so that's going to give me a negative here. When I test a positive 1, that's going to give me a positive and a positive, so that's a positive. And when I test a 5, I'm going to get a positive and a negative, so that's a negative. So right now, I know it's decreasing from negative infinity to 0 and 4 to infinity. But that wasn't the question. The question was and concave down. So I need to go on to find the second derivative. And when you find the second derivative, you're going to go back to here and you're going to get 12 minus 6x. I'm going to take 12 minus 6x, set it equal to 0. I'm going to get that 6x is equal to 12 because I just add that 6x over. And x is equal to 2. That's my critical value. That's my second derivative. Okay, so now I test into 12 minus 6x, and then if I test 0, that's going to be positive. If I test 3, 12 minus 6 times 3, well, that's going to give me a negative. So I know it's concave down from 2 to positive infinity. I know it's decreasing from negative infinity to 0. This is where f prime is decreasing. And from 4 to positive infinity. Well, there's no overlap from negative infinity to 0. But there is an overlap here. So where are they both happening? From 4 to positive infinity. And it would be a parentheses. All right, so that was our practice that we did one by one together. And you could have done this ahead of time and checked your answers, but your homework that I want to see is that second worksheet. All right, good luck. Email me if you have any questions.